Today I'm going to go over the Zpacks Triplex trekking pole tent. So this is an ultralight single-walled shelter made by the company Zpacks, which specializes in ultra-lightweight equipment. It's a very simple tent to set up. It only requires 2 trekking poles, or you can get 2 collapsible carbon poles from Zpacks if you don't use trekking poles. And then it gets guyed out with a bunch of stakes. So what I want to do is show you how I like to set up the tent, some of the features of the tent, go over what I like, some of the things I don't like, and then I'll show you how I like to pack it back up to get it back down nice and small for your backpack. Zpacks includes this very, very lightweight stuff sack. If you put this down, it will blow away. So the very first thing I like to do is stake out one of the corners that's downwind to help make sure this doesn't blow away. The wind right now is out of the west behind me, so I'm going to stake this one out. So the next thing I'm going to do is stake that corner over there, and then I go to the other side, do the trekking pole, that stake, repeat, and then do the last 2 corners. One tip I have for you is that the trekking pole height, I use 115 centimeters as my standard height for the poles, and that works really well for pitching this. You can set it higher or lower, whether you want a more storm-worthy or more breathable tent setup. The one thing of note is that these cups that are reinforced into this tent right here, they have a tendency to either have the vestibule get stuck up in them like so, or sometimes you can have this mesh get stuck up in there. It's worth taking a couple moments just to make sure that those things aren't in there before you do it, because you'd be sandwiching those weaker materials in between the tent roof and your trekking pole grip. This part's really important as well. You want to get everything in a straight line as possible. So what I mean by that is the stake on the far side, its line, this pole, the ridge line to this here, and then this pole, and lastly, this sky line is in as straight of a line as possible. And you can kind of sight through the tent a little bit to do that. And also when I'm in soft ground like this, it does help a lot if you give the trekking pole a few taps, try to seat it. It'll give it a little bit more structural stability, and it also makes it easier to set up. Like that. All of the guy lines have a line lock that's connected to the tent with this very fast, easy adjustment to tighten them in. So once I have everything initially staked out, oftentimes I have to do a quick once around and reposition those stakes to get a nice straight line going into the corners. You'll notice on this particular tent, there are the 3 guy out points on each side, both the head and the foot. It's a symmetrical tent, doesn't matter which side is which. But on both of those faces, it does have 3 guy out points. Because those aren't as important in the structure, I usually bring some lightweight shepherd hook style stakes just to save a little bit of weight. You can do all 3 of them to one stake, however, it doesn't give you the same kind of integrity inside by pulling that material away as if you use 3 stakes. So on one side, I'll show you what it looks like with 1, and then on the other, we'll do all 3 how it's meant to be done, just so you can see the difference. So right now I've got the vestibule doors rolled up, and because there's no zippers on these, I oftentimes, if the weather is nice, will leave them rolled up just because it's a little bit easier to set up the tent and they're not flapping around when you pack the tent up. They have little toggles that are very easy to take off. And one thing that's really unique to this tent is instead of using zippers to close up the vestibule, it has these little D-rings on the bottom of each of the vestibule flaps. And the way that those work is the same guy line that goes to the center ridge line has another cord lock on it. And this cord lock, I'll zoom in just a moment, has this metal attachment point that has 2 little hooks. So you put each D-ring in its own hook, and then you can tighten down and away, and that pulls the vestibules out. So I'll show you what that looks like now. So this is what it looks like when you close the vestibule up. True with any single wall shelter, when you can, when the weather permits, having the vestibules open to get lots of airflow through the tent will help a lot with the condensation issues that single wall tents are prone to have. So unless it's really raining hard, I usually won't close both vestibule sides if I can help it. A lot of times if the rain's coming from a certain direction, you can close just one side and leave the other side open, because this style tent does really get condensation issues pretty quickly under the wrong or right conditions, however you want to phrase it. They're prone to condensation is what I'm saying. For really heavy duty weather protection, there are these little toggle clips on both sides that you can tuck this in. And that'll help if the wind's really trying to separate this. It does close it. However, I will say that that's actually pretty hard to get on when you're inside the tent trying to close it up for the night. Let's do a walkthrough of the tent and its features. So first things first, I want to show you what this vestibule closure system looks like. So here you can see the two D-rings on the vestibule flaps with their clip and that line lock, which goes down to a tied knot there that's staked out, which is the same line that goes up to the peak and has a separate line lock there. You can see the toggle clip on the vestibule door to keep it closed. It uses the same style toggle clips to keep the vestibule doors rolled back. This is, of course, the side that has the 3 staked out lines, which does a good job of lifting that big panel and pulling it out to create a little bit more height where your feet/head goes inside the tent. It pulls that material away a little bit more. This is, of course, the vestibules just draped and not pulled out on that tensioner. And here is a strategy you can do if you're really trying to save weight, and that's by putting all 3 of those points into one lone stake. There isn't a lot of a weight-bearing strain on that stake. It's really just to pull the material away from your head/feet to reduce condensation issues, but you just won't get the same level of effectiveness because of the angle that these go as you would with the 3 on the other side. So it's kind of up to you what you want to do in terms of how many stakes you want to carry. So one tip I do have for you for the vestibule doors is if you roll them in, and so rotating the folds clockwise, it ends up with all of those folds in the roll being underneath the fly, as opposed to if you rolled it this way, you'd end up with all those rolls coming out up in here. And when the rain or the wind hits this, it's a lot more protected by all those folds being on the underside. So that does help a little bit. And if you do have good weather, you can store the vestibules how I have them here. It's a nice ability to make it set up and be taken down a little bit faster. So let's check out the doors and the inside of the tent quick. The doors have this very large rainbow style double zipper pull, and I really do like it. I find that it's easy to use, even one-handed, to open the door. The door folds in and goes down onto the floor of the tent, but it gives you a really large opening that you can easily get in and out of the tent, besides the pole being in the center, like most trekking pole tents are. But it makes putting things in there, like your sleeping pad or getting your sleeping bag out when you're setting everything up, very easy. You do have to be a little bit mindful to tuck this in when you get in and out of the tent. The issue is if you let it flop out, even though it's a very small zipper, you can get sand and dirt into the zipper, and that can shorten the lifespan of it. The inside of the tent has a very high center line, plenty of room to sit up even on a 3-inch thick pad for most people. I'm 5'11", and I still have inches of room above me. There's a pocket at the center, both on that side and that side. It is a symmetrical tent, so you can choose whichever side of the tent you want to sleep on. You'll notice there's these little elastic connectors that go to those guy out points, and the purpose of those is to really help keep the bathtub floor up off of the ground on that side. One of the ways that this tent and the Duplex try to reduce the amount of condensation inside is by having these screened in areas that are connected at the head and the foot, so that as condensation really develops and runs down the inside of the tent, it can drain through those rather than getting onto the floor. So what are my favorite things about this tent? It's impossible to beat the weight for a 3-person shelter for it to weigh less than 1.5 pounds. That's absolutely amazing. It packs down incredibly small. The pitch is pretty simple. It takes some practice to get it staked out correctly, and I usually do have to do some adjusting in each corner every time I set it up anyway. But it's pretty straightforward and relatively easy to do compared to some tents. I really like the large double doors. The amount of room it gives you in the vestibules is very nice for 2 people as well. The pockets at the head and the foot are nice for organization, although it basically is still putting things on the ground as soon as you have any kind of weight inside those pockets. It pulls those down, which does help with ventilation, but it does keep the things that you're trying to keep from sitting or lying on getting down onto the ground anyway. I really like these toggles, these plastic ones. Even though it adds a little bit of weight, I find it much easier to get that out and to put that in than a lot of the ultra lightweight little floppy ones. I have a lot of hard times with that style, so I do prefer this. So like most tents, there are some design issues that I have with this tent. So the first thing is really more of a single wall issue than anything else, but it is condensation. You are trading increased condensation for lower weights with single wall shelters, and most people do that readily, including myself. However, it's worth noting that this particular shelter, because it has such huge side panels, I've found that in this shelter I've had worse condensation issues than any of the other single wall shelters that I've used, especially when I've had more than one person in there. The head and the foot of your sleeping bag get so close to these sides that I almost always wake up with a wet foot box, and also the area right above my face where the condensation from my breath forms is also very prone to getting a lot of condensation on the roof. And it doesn't take much for you to tap that to get wet. So that's my major issue with this particular tent. My wife and I used it for the 100-mile wilderness, and we had one particularly humid, rainy day that the condensation inside developed so strongly that the tree drips from the raindrops building up on branches and falling down were hitting the top of the tent hard enough that it was creating the condensation on the inside to splatter in our faces, and it happened all night. It was very unpleasant. It's not necessarily this exact tent's fault for that, but having that single wall material so close to your face does increase that likelihood of happening compared to some other designs that are out. I'm also not a huge fan of the bathtub floor style in this. They call it a floating floor, and it really is. You can see that it's basically just suspended from the tarp style material, and it is completely bug proof and probably the lightest weight design that you could come up with. However, it does make the inside of the tent often feel smaller than it really is. If you have the tent pitched higher to get better ventilation through it and to get those rainfly material corners up higher, it pulls the floor up with it. And it is true, when you have some weight in there, it will help pull it down. Those elastic cords there are stretched to allow that to happen. But oftentimes, unless you pitch this just right, it really would be a super tight fit for 3 people. Guy out points are always a benefit because they can add stability, especially under certain circumstances, such as which direction the wind is blowing out of. However, because this tent is so large and has these huge, wide open areas, they've designed it to need 3, which does mean 6 additional stakes to set this up, which does add up in weight. You can choose to try to save weight, but it won't perform as well as if you were to stick each one out individually. My number one issue that I have with the triplex and the duplex is the same thing. It's how they close the vestibules. I'm just not a fan of the clip system. It is very simple. You're not dealing with the extra weight of a zipper or the failure of a zipper if it gets really dirty and breaks on you mid-trip. However, I don't like closing the vestibule while I'm inside the tent. Doing it on the outside is a piece of cake. To loosen this up, you simply pull that and it loosens up, and then to tighten it's really easy. You just pull that, and that's kind of nice. However, when you're inside the tent, especially if it's raining, You can see it's a few feet away from where the bathtub floor ends out to this point here. And in order to make this work properly, you have to pull this line in that direction. So it's kind of awkward. You have to stick your hand all the way through out here and grab down here and then pull away from you. And I find it awkward, and I just don't like it, especially if the ground is wet or if it's raining. It's nice that they do give you the ability to have the extra security from this, but for the same reasons, trying to close yourself in by reaching through and doing this, I find it to be cumbersome and kind of annoying. And because of that, that's the biggest area of dislike that I have for this tent, is really just that clip system. Some people prefer it. Some people actually absolutely love it. And if you're mostly in nice weather and you don't have to close the vestibules very often, then it's not an issue at all. But I'm not a huge fan of that style. I think I would prefer the same model with a zipper. All right, I'll show you how I like to take this tent down. So right now it's actually a beautiful day. It's not super windy. This tent is so light that while you're taking it down, it's very important to leave at least 1 or 2 stakes downwind. So for example, the wind today is gently out of the west coming this way. So I'm going to leave the stakes on this corner and that corner in until the very end so I don't risk it blowing away and getting this relatively delicate material stuck in all of the pine and thorns over there. So what I like to do is if I can get away with it, if the weather is nice, I do like to store it with these doors rolled up. And this is what I was talking about before. If you roll it this way, all the folds can grab water, water can pour down into this, or the wind can open it up. So the trick is to roll it inside itself. So then I like to go around, loosen each guy line slightly on the line lock, and then also remove the stakes as I go. When the tent is pitched on soft ground, like how it is right here on the grass, the trekking poles will actually do a pretty good job keeping the tent held up in place. If it's really windy, you have to kind of do something different, but I'll show you under normal circumstances what I like to do. So now that I'm actually ready to take this down, I'm going to take the last 2 stakes out, and I just have to be mindful of the wind. So what I like to do is I like to try to find the center of the floor, which is at the middle of that rainbow, and I like to bring it up to the sewn reinforced cup where the trekking pole goes. So essentially I'm folding the whole tent up in half, including the floor, and I find it helps really protect the really delicate mesh that's in the doors. So I have those both pinched in my hands. And then really simply, I like to fold it in half like so. And then you can pick either end and just roll it up without putting too much pressure on it, a loose roll. And you can see it gets down really quite small. And there you go. This is loose enough that if I need to, when I stick it into my pack, I can compress it more. But it gets down really quite small, especially for a 3-person tent. One thing of note is that Zpacks and most ultralight DCF, Dyneema composite fabric tent manufacturers, do recommend lightly folding and then rolling the tent up rather than just stuffing it. They've found that it really helps increase the lifespan of the material that way, so that is recommended by the manufacturer. Let's go over the weight on a Zpacks Triplex. So the inner tent body with all the guy lines in, included stuff sack, on my scale, comes in at 23.3 ounces, which is 662 grams. That's incredible for a 3-person tent. One thing about this tent is by design and its size, it needs a lot of stakes to hold it out. It needs 4 for the corners, 2 for the center ridge line, which also controls the vestibule doors. So that's a total of 6. But then each side has 3 additional stakes to help hold the body with a little bit more protection from the wind and give it some more structure. So that's an additional 6. So you are talking about 12 stakes to properly pitch this. And even in pretty good weather, those side stakes are pretty important to get the right shape and really lift that material up. I keep those in this little fun stuff sack by Hilltop Packs. So I'm using Easton nails. Of course, your stakes that you choose to use with it will vary. In my case, using mostly nails with some titanium shepherd hooks, it comes in at 118 grams, which is equal to 4.2 ounces. So who's the triplex for? It's super, super light for a 3-person tent. Who I would recommend this tent to is somebody that already has trekking poles that wants to set it up as a trekking pole tent. You can get from Zpacks poles that will go up in place of the trekking poles, collapsible carbon ones. They're relatively expensive, and it sort of defeats the benefits of a trekking pole tent if you are still carrying additional poles to set it up. It will be lighter than a regular freestanding tent. But that being said, I think this really shines when you're using it with your own trekking poles to save on weight. The space in here is huge. However, like most ultralight tents, you only get about 20 inches of width per person. So for example, a 2-person tent might be just over 40 inches wide, whereas this is just over 60 inches wide. So yes, you can fit 3 standard mats down inside, making it a true 3-person tent, but it's a tight fit. Unless you are super, super close with the other people you'll be sharing it with, or if you're really focusing on saving as much weight as possible, this is, in my personal opinion, a better tent for 2 than 3, although you can certainly make 3 work. One concern I have about using this tent with 3 people is if you're in conditions that are going to create more condensation. So if you're camping next to a lake, or if it's really rainy, or any of those other variables if you're in a valley, the body heat plus the breath generated by 3 people sleeping inside would have a very high level of condensation. Especially because the way that you're lying, especially if you're lying all the same way, you're all breathing into the same roof panel. And that roof panel is kind of close to your face based on the design of the tent and its simplicity. So that might really create a lot of condensation. If you're able to sleep with the vestibules both open, that will definitely help out a lot. But it is something to be concerned about. And all of these single wall tents are more prone to condensation in the first place. It's just part of the drawback to using a single wall tent and why so many tents exist as double wall tents. The precipitation on the inside of the roof really adds up, so a lot of people are used to wiping it down with bandana or something like that in the morning to try to get that condensation out before they pack it up. Big dog eats his treats very fast. He's done. I have a consulting website. It's www.linksoutdoorsgear.com. You can contact me directly on there, and I'd be more than happy to show you more features of this tent or talk about some pitching strategies. And for that matter, we can talk about any kind of gear that you'd like. I've got quite a bit of experience backpacking, canoe camping, rock climbing, mountain bike, backcountry skis. So if you're curious and are interested in having a chat with me one-on-one, check me out there. You can find me.